My name is Cherri Murphy, and I'm an interfaith organizer with East Bay Alliance for a Sustainable Economy and Lyft organizer based in Oakland, California. For 3 years, Lyft was my primary source of income, and I completed over 12,000 rides. I was in my last year of my master's in divinity and beginning to start my doctoral program. And back in 2017, Lyft seemed like a godsend. They advertised a job with a future feature of flexibility that would allow me to make money while also loaning me a rental car. I was in desperate need of a car and that so-called flexibility and began working. Soon I found myself in a deadly and inflexible cycle. Over my time working for Lyft, I've seen many drivers become entrapped in the gig economy where app workers like me find ourselves in a constant cycle of working just to afford to keep working. Every passing year, I'll spend more and more hours of unpaid time waiting for rides and personally covering work expenses like gas and rental fees, while it became harder and harder to sustain a living. When COVID-19 hit, it became transparent that gig corporations cared only about the bottom line. While workers were left scrambling in the face of a deadly pandemic, gig corporations like Uber petitioned to deny workers access to state unemployment benefits. That meant that an entire workforce was forced to choose between risking our lives to pay rent or sheltering in a place, in a home we might lose. While gig corporations refused to protect their workers, they were quick to spend over $200 million on Prop 22, a California ballot measure written for and paid for by Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, and other gig corporations. With Prop 22, gig corporations intended to upend labor protections and rewrite California law to make legal their exploitation of gig workers. The greatest irony of their Prop 22 campaign was that the very corporations that were spending millions to deny their majority Black, brown, and immigrant workforce access to life-saving benefits and wages were also trying to position themselves as leaders in the fight for racial justice. To trick voters to support their campaign, Lyft ran ads, quoting Maya Angelou's poems, and Uber bought billboards stating, "If you tolerate racism, delete Uber," to capitalize on the Black Lives Matter movement. Uber and Lyft worked tirelessly to exploit racial justice movements in an effort to cover up the truth. The truth that these corporations rely entirely on the exploitation of workers, the majority of whom are Black, immigrants, and people of color. Under Prop 22, we are a workforce entirely managed by an algorithm. We are told that we have flexibility, but if we choose not to accept a ride or ask a customer to leave our vehicle for refusing to wear a mask, we are penalized. We are denied access to health care or paid sick leave, meaning workers are forced to continue working even when they are unwell. We have no paid time off, meaning we cannot easily enjoy time with our families. And under Prop 22, we are not paid for the time we spend waiting for rides or deliveries. As a result, we are only compensated for an estimated 67% of our time working, bringing our guaranteed hourly wage to around $5.65 an hour. Most importantly, the measure also makes it nearly impossible for California to pass laws protecting drivers who organize collectively, silencing a fundamental worker right. This is why workers working over 60 hours a week in the world's fifth largest economy are living in their cars. These corporations would tout talking points and pay spokespeople to frame a narrative that erases the real struggles of the Black and brown workers who are driving their profits. And that is why it is absolutely crucial for lawmakers to listen to real Black and brown drivers who can tell their truth. We understand more than anyone the links profiteers will go to build legal loopholes so that they can have full access to our bodies, our labor, without any recourse for workers. Congress should act boldly to free our society from the violence of poverty and low wages by protecting gig workers and ensuring that we have essential and equal rights at work, including employee protections under federal law. The reality of gig workers is not reflective of a just and equitable society. It is time to end exploitation of gig workers and ensure all workers receive their fair share. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Rebecca Dixon, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Employment Law Project. Today's app-based or gig economy is frequently dressed up in talk about modern innovation and the 21st century of work. But in reality, this type of precarious contingent work is nothing new. There have always been jobs that are low-paying, insecure, and dismissed as unskilled. And workers of color have always been and continue to be heavily concentrated in these kinds of exploitative industries. The only difference is today, there are companies that now use a digital app to manage their workforce, companies like Uber, DoorDash, and Instacart, and thus claim they don't have to play by the rules. The results is that these app-based companies have been able for far too long to shed responsibility for providing safe and just working conditions, through which workers can thrive on and off the job. Over the last 4 decades, federal policies have greatly eroded the bargaining power of workers and instead concentrated more power in the hands of corporations and those who already have substantial wealth and power. This has perpetuated and worsened the racial wealth and wage gaps and contributed to the ever-increasing degradation of working conditions for far too many. Even federal laws designed to lift up working people have had exclusions that lock too many people out of basic employment rights. The New Deal, this country's greatest creation of labor standards, set a baseline standard of work rights, including Social Security retirement benefits, unemployment insurance, minimum wage, overtime pay, and the right to organize. Yet, as we all know, and as I personally know from my family's history, the benefits of the New Deal were not available to all. In 1938, the year that my father was born, the New Deal was in full swing, but my father, his family, and just about everyone he knew, they were left out because of exclusions of agricultural and domestic workers. The result of that was that nearly half of all Black men, Mexican American men, and Native American men and women were affected, plus significant numbers of Asian American workers as well. 90% of Black women, yes, 9 in 10, worked either as domestics or in agriculture in the 1930s, and they were excluded. And to be sure, the many white workers who made up the majority of excluded workers were unfairly excluded too. And so when you think about the problems that working people are facing today, and when we think about the millions of workers without employee protections in the so-called gig economy, who disproportionately are people of color, we must learn from the past if we are to move forward to a just economy. The first step is to reject the corporate interests behind the policies that carve workers out from universal protections. Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, Instacart, and other app-based companies are loudly proclaiming misinformation in state legislatures, city councils, and federal offices. Combined, Black and Latinx workers make up less than 29% of the nation's total workforce, but they comprise almost 42% of app-based workers. These companies claim their workers want to remain independent contractors, but as we'll hear today, what workers want is good pay, job security, flexibility, and their full rights under federal laws. This is a reasonable and just demand, and necessary work in order to close generational, gender, and racial wage gaps. Congress must reject exclusions that lock people of color out of basic employment protections and should pass legislation to extend protection to all workers, including app-based workers. The PRO Act is a great first step, which extends bargaining protections to workers who have been wrongly called independent contractors by their employers. Senator Murray's Worker Flexibility Act similarly extends employment and labor protections to workers who have been misclassified by their employers. Across the country, we have seen app-based workers organize for their health and safety and demand that their rights be recognized, protected, and expanded. We call on Congress to recognize these workers and to act boldly to ensure that they have flexibility and full rights and equal protection under federal law. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First, my thanks go to the staff and assistants who made this briefing possible. As Brian noted, my name is Lauren Jacobs, Executive Director of the Partnership for Working Families. I join you today because, as my colleagues have begun to outline, something is dangerously wrong in the gig economy. The partnership is directly engaged in reversing these trends. We support direct worker organizing through Gig Workers Rising, a project of our affiliate Working Partnerships USA, and along with our colleagues at NELP, we have documented how app-based corporations have laid siege to laws protecting workers in cities around the country. All of this to maintain a structurally racist system of work. Black and brown immigrant workers who make up the majority of the gig economy have been publicly lauded as essential or even heroes. And yet the shameful conditions under which they work demonstrates how corporations view them as disposable. Miserably low wages, non-existent safety nets, meritless terminations, and management by algorithm are just the most prominent features of the Orwellian dystopia that is app-based work. And how did we get here? To put it simply, we allowed corporations who are hostile to regulation and the rule of law to bully local state governments and blow up our labor conventions. For example, in 2014, Uber and Lyft began operating illegally in the city of Austin. When the city proposed a permit, pricing, and background check system, pretty reasonable, Uber and Lyft reacted by threatening litigation and flooding the city with lobbyists to prevent the ordinance. When the law actually passed, through both a council vote and then again through a citywide referendum, the companies then cut off operations to the whole city. It was only after the Texas legislature preempted the local law did the companies resume services. This is a cautionary tale, and it has replayed over and over across the country, most recently in California. As we documented last summer in our report with NELP, Rigging the Gig, Proposition 22 was drawn directly from the playbook established by Big Tobacco and the gun lobby. Bend the law, bully public officials, and if all else fails, buy the law when you need with the seemingly endless amounts of cash that you have stockpiled. As Zubin and Cherri detailed, Proposition 22's preemption of California law is an unprecedented attempt to create a sovereign nation status for corporate affairs. These companies will recognize no governing body which dare exercise its regulatory authority. In fact, Uber and Lyft have already preempted or obtained partial exemptions from laws regulating the employment status of drivers in over 40 states. Yet the harm to workers of color is the most critical component of this conversation. As Rebecca noted, these are workers forced into a system of precarious labor with no protections or bargaining power. Workers of color aren't clamoring for these jobs out of an entrepreneurial spirit. People are doing them to survive. And this is why it's really perverse, in fact, kind of sick, to say that these workers value the flexibility or freedom that app work provides them. It's really doublespeak. There's no flexibility in being deactivated, cut off from your income, not knowing how you'll pay rent or food. And tell me what freedom exists in working 80 hours a week because a company refuses to pay for your expenses and its expenses that you spend to do the job, or the time you spend waiting for fares and unilaterally cutting your wages on top of that. In fact, drivers in California are continuing to report shrinking wages. That's the exact reverse of what the companies suggested would happen during their $220 billion Prop 22 campaign. Heartbreaking and raging stories are emerging from workers all over California, just like Cherri. These are people who are accruing expenses on the apps, fuel, parking tickets, tolls, that all but erase all of their earnings and leaving them wondering how they'll get by. These companies are not innovators. They're shoddy recyclers. They've reinvented a contract labor system that mirrors sharecropping. The workers absorb the risk, and they own only the capital which depreciates in value. And they must pay the app owner first before they can earn a living from their labor. Some believe this model will not expand to new industries and sectors, but corporations, as we've designed them and as the laws have ordained them in this country, don't exist for the common social welfare. They exist to deliver value and profit to the owners. And if a company can find a legal way to slash the cost of labor by placing their workforce on an app, they will do it. Enforced misclassification plays a big role, eliminating the need to pay for things like sick leave, unemployment insurance, or to have to engage in collective bargaining, a right that has existed in this country for almost 100 years now. Our government really is the only institution that is shaped and mandated to act on behalf of the common good. And the common good here would be irreparably damaged by any third way agreement. As you review any proposal, I urge you consider these companies' actions in context. Not only would such a corporate solution undermine workers, it would only serve to perpetuate the racist exclusion of workers of color from basic workplace protections. This is not innovation. It's an invitation to ensure that our laws continue to unravel at the direct expense of workers and the public. Indeed, the appification of work can, and I believe will, move beyond delivery and transportation to encompass things like grocery stocking, nursing, janitorial work, and much more. This is an invitation to a nightmare, and it should be opposed. Thank you very much.